Good morning, everyone. Quoting the prophet Isaiah, we hear our Lord in today's gospel say, "This people honors me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me." What does our Lord mean by the word heart? Obviously, he's not talking about simply a muscle, an organ inside our chest that pumps blood throughout our body. That is our heart. But the biblical understanding of the term heart is much larger, a bigger heart, if you will, than just a physical understanding of heart. In the Bible, in the way that our Lord is using this term, we understand heart to be the very seat of human decision-making. It is the very place of our thoughts and choices. In a very real sense, the Bible understands the word heart to be the core of the person. It's who you and I are in our heart. So when we say that I give you my heart, we're saying I give you my all. I give you myself. And one thing is clear throughout the Bible, is that the heart is meant for God. You know the great commandment, right? Love God with what? All your heart. 4th century later, after our Lord's own passion, death, and resurrection, it's St. Augustine who says, "Our hearts are restless until they rest in you, O Lord." Our heart is who we are, and it's meant for God. But again, our Lord turns to the Pharisees and the Sadducees and says, "You honor me with your lips, but your hearts are far from me." Why? Why are their hearts far from God? Well, the Pharisees and scribes were experts at the law. They read again and again the words from our first reading from the book of Deuteronomy. "Now, Israel, hear the statutes and decrees which the Lord teaches." And Moses exhorts the people of Israel to remain attentive in observing carefully each one of those statutes and decrees. The problem for the Pharisees and the Sadducees wasn't that they were faithful, which we all ought to be, to the commandments of the Lord, but they became so hyper-legalistic that their heart wandered far from God. They worried more about unclean cups and jugs and hands rather than unclean hearts. That's why our Lord in today's gospel uses a very strong term, rebuking them by saying that they are hypocrites. Now, the Greek term hypocrite, hypokrites, is the technical term for an actor. It means in Greek a play acting. And one who was a hypokritos was someone who was on a stage, literally wearing a mask, a persona, and acting out a role. That was a hypokritos. So our Lord is saying to the Sadducees and the Pharisees, he's saying, "You're a hypocrite. You're more concerned with the externals. You're all caught up into those things, and yet your heart is far from the Lord." You see, they were more concerned about looking good than being good. They had forgotten that their external purifications were simply meant to symbolize and express a purity of heart. Now, we have to be careful, don't we? We have to be very careful that we don't point to the Pharisees and the Sadducees and say, see, there are the hypocrites. we also have to do a good examination of conscience, each and every one of us, constantly. Because, the problem in the world is not so much out there. Our Lord says it very succinctly. The problem in the world comes from in here. The things that come out from within, Jesus says, are what defile. From within people, from their hearts, come evil thoughts, unchastity, theft, murder, etc., etc. It comes from within. We're all capable of that evil. Some of you may know the name G.K. Chesterton. G.K. Chesterton was a great apologist, philosopher, and writer of the early 20th century. And he was an Englishman. And the London Times once invited a number of authors of Chesterton's time to write in and tell the readership of the London Times what's wrong with the world. They were to write a letter or essay explaining the things that are wrong with the world. And so all of these great literary figures of Chesterton's time wrote in explaining all the problems. Chesterton, however, wrote the briefest essay, a simple letter. What's wrong with the world? He wrote, "Dear sirs, I am. Sincerely yours, G.K. Chesterton." What's wrong with the world? I am. It comes from the heart. It comes from in here. It's not the exterior. Rather, it is our choices in which good and evil originate. And in our world today, I just briefly would like to mention two things that are a threat, if you will, to the heart, that can make the heart unclean. The first threat that is very pervasive in our hypersexualized society is the threat of lust. Yes, lust corrupts a clean heart. Sexuality is a great gift from God and a very powerful force in our lives. But the order and the good of human sexuality becomes distorted and disordered when we seek self-gratification above God's plan. And it distorts the good and dignity of the human person. Lust degrades the other, making the other an object for my pleasure rather than a person for my love. Our heart becomes unclean by being fixated on a selfish sexual pleasure in which I use the other in imagination or in physical action, using another instead of loving them and following God's plan for chastity in my vocation. So you see, lust can distort the heart, making it unclean, keeping it far from God. And another difficulty and struggle that we all have in our life is the problem of materialism. Materialism, too, corrupts the human heart. The goods of this world are good. They're not bad. It's not bad to have possessions and things. But the question is, how do we use them? And what do they do with our heart? Do we possess our possessions? Or do our possessions possess us? Someone once told me, you have to remember, you never see a U-Haul behind a hearse. Right? You can't take it with you, in other words. It's not coming with you. The hearse is all by itself. When we face God, we can't bring any of our things with us. Do we possess our things, or do our possessions possess us? For instance, if our iPhone isn't working right, if our home is in need of major repair, if we're having money problems or we don't have those beautiful clothes that we always wanted, what does that do to our heart? Are we disturbed? Do we lose our peace? Do we possess our possessions, or do our possessions possess us? Indeed, these two threats, lust and materialism, are always going to be present in our world. And they can be sources of corruption in our heart. But by the grace of God, if we live this purity of heart, if with the Lord's help our heart is dedicated to Him first, then we need not worry. Then indeed we will have a clean heart. And as our Lord says in the Beatitudes, blessed are the pure of heart, for they shall see God. A pure heart, well versed in chastity, well versed in living this detachment from material things, is a heart that will be near the Lord. In this way, not only will our lips, but our hearts not be far from Him. They will be with the Lord. And indeed, we will be blessed.